At a luxurious dinner, a young woman is judged in silence by her boyfriend's family. Without them knowing, the mother uses another language to humiliate her without being confronted. But everything changes when she reveals that she understood every word spoken there, and her reaction transforms the embarrassment into a lesson impossible to ignore. If this beautiful story of overcoming and love interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us from which city you are watching us. Continuing. Louisa always knew that the world was not made to make life easy for those born without an important surname or an address that impressed. She grew up in the east zone of São Paulo, in the neighborhood of Itaquera, in a simple house where money was never left over, but love was never lacking. Her mother, Dona Celia, worked as a cook in a restaurant downtown, and her father, Seu Mario, was a bus driver. Since she was little, Louisa learned that studying was the only bridge capable of taking her beyond the invisible borders that separated her world from that other one, full of opportunities that seemed reserved only for a few. She took every lesson, every book, every chance to learn something new seriously. While her friends went out on weekends, Louisa stayed at the municipal library, lost among pages that showed her entire universes. It was there, among dusty shelves and concentrated silences, that she discovered her fascination with languages. She started with English, studying alone with internet videos, and used books she bought at second-hand stores. Then came Spanish, which seemed easier because of its proximity to Portuguese, and then, almost out of stubbornness, she decided to tackle Russian. Nobody understood why a girl from Itaquera wanted to learn Russian. Her mother thought it was beautiful, but saw no use for it. Her father joked, saying she would become a spy. But Louisa didn't need approval. She needed purpose, and each new word she mastered, each grammatical structure she unraveled, was like a small victory against all the voices that insisted on saying that people like her didn't get far. At 26, Louisa worked as a freelance translator, doing odd jobs for companies that needed documents in English, Spanish, and occasionally Russian. It wasn't a fortune she earned, but it was the fruit of her own effort, and that had a value that no money could pay. She lived alone in a small rented apartment in São Mateus, shared the bills carefully, and saved every cent she could. Life wasn't easy, but it was hers. It was on an ordinary afternoon, during a networking event for translation professionals at a hotel in Pinheiros, that she met Gabriel. He was there representing his family's company, a conglomerate that operated in the real estate sector and needed translators for international contracts. Gabriel Almeida Fontana. The surname said it all. A traditional São Paulo family, a name that opened doors, a surname that echoed in circles where Louisa never imagined stepping. But what surprised her wasn't his status. It was the way Gabriel looked at her, not with that air of superiority she already knew well, but with genuine curiosity. They talked about languages, about the complexity of Russian, about the pitfalls of corporate English. Gabriel seemed fascinated by her knowledge, by the way Louisa explained the nuances of each language with passion and confidence. At the end of the event, he asked for her contact. Professionally, of course, or at least that's what both pretended to believe at that first moment. The following days brought messages. They started talking about work, possible contracts, deadlines, and values. But gradually the conversations slipped into other territories. Gabriel told her about the pressure of carrying a heavy surname, about the family's expectations, about the feeling of living in a golden cage. Louisa shared stories of her childhood, the difficulties she faced, the dreams she still had. They were completely different worlds, but something in those exchanges created a fragile and beautiful bridge between them. The first date happened at a cafe in Vila Madalena, far from the places frequented by Gabriel's family. He arrived driving a discreet car, not the BMW he usually used, as if he wanted to be just Gabriel, not the Fontana heir. They talked for hours. Louisa realized that behind that imposing surname was a man tired of playing a role, someone seeking authenticity in a world made of appearances. And Gabriel discovered in Louisa a strength that money couldn't buy, a dignity that didn't need a surname to exist. The following months were intense. They saw each other whenever possible, building a relationship that had to hide a bit, not because Gabriel was ashamed, but because he knew that introducing Luisa to the family would be like lighting a powder keg trail. His mother, Donna Helena Fontana, was known for her rigor, for her obsession with the family's image, and for her ability to push away anyone she considered inadequate for the standards of the Almeida Fontanas. Gabriel postponed the inevitable. He made up excuses, scheduled family dinners, and then cancelled them, promised Luisa that the right moment would come soon. She didn't demand it. She understood the complexity of the situation and didn't want to force anything. But inside, an uneasiness grew. It wasn't insecurity about herself. Luisa knew who she was, knew her value, and didn't need anyone's approval. But she felt that the relationship, as beautiful as it was, lived in a bubble that sooner or later would need to burst. It was on a Friday night, after a quiet dinner at a Japanese restaurant in Itaim, that Gabriel finally brought up the subject. They were walking down the street, side by side, when he held her hand and stopped. "Gabriel, are you okay?" Luisa asked, noticing the tension on his face. "I need to tell you something." He took a deep breath. "My mother wants to meet you." Luisa felt her heart accelerate, but she kept a serene expression. "When?" she asked simply. "Next Saturday, dinner at their house." He looked at her with a mixture of apprehension and guilt. "I know I'm putting you in a difficult situation. My family is complicated, especially my mother. She has her criteria, her demands, and I know you'll feel that." Luisa squeezed his hand. "Gabriel, if it's important to you, it's important to me. I'm not afraid of your mother." But he knew it wasn't fear. It was something worse. It was the certainty that Luisa would be judged, measured, weighed on an unfair scale where origin was worth more than character, where money spoke louder than dignity. "Are you sure?" he insisted. "Because once you enter that house, I can't predict how my mother will react. She is controlling, she is rigid, and when she decides someone isn't up to the task, she makes sure to make that clear." Luisa smiled, but it was a smile that carried an ancient strength, born from years of facing sideways glances, mean comments, and doors that closed before she even got close. "I know how to take care of myself, Gabriel. I grew up in a reality where I had to prove my value every day. Your mother won't be the first person to judge me because of my origin, and she probably won't be the last. But if you want me to meet your family, I will. And I will go being exactly who I am." He pulled her into a hug, feeling both pride and dread. Pride because Luisa was the most authentic woman he had ever known. Dread because he knew his mother would spare no effort to test her, to expose any fragility, to prove that that girl from Itaquera had no place beside an Almeida Fontana. In the following days, Luisa didn't change her routine. She continued working, delivering translations, studying. She didn't spend money she didn't have buying expensive clothes to impress anyone. She chose a simple, discreet dress she already had in her wardrobe. It wasn't a designer label, but it was beautiful and made her feel comfortable. She stopped by her mother's house on Thursday night. Donna Celia was in the kitchen preparing dinner when Luisa told her about the invitation. "Daughter, are you sure about this?" her mother asked, concern etched on her face. "Rich people are different. They won't treat you as an equal." "I know, Mother, but I'm not going to stop going because I'm afraid of being judged. If Gabriel wants me to meet his family, I will, and if they don't accept me, that's their problem, not mine." Donna Celia dried her hands on the dish towel and hugged her daughter. "You've always been strong, Luisa. You've always been the most determined. Just don't forget who you are when you're in that mansion full of luxury. Don't let them make you feel smaller." "Never, Mother, never." On Saturday, Gabriel came to pick her up at 7 in the evening. He was nervous. Luisa could tell by the way he drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, by the way he checked his watch every few minutes. They drove in silence along Marginal Pinheiros until they reached Jardim Europa, the noble neighborhood where the Fontana residence was located. The house was imposing. It wasn't just big, it was designed to impress, to make it clear that important people lived there. The iron gate opened automatically, and the car entered an avenue lined with impeccable gardens. Luisa looked out the window, observing every detail, but didn't let herself be intimidated. She had grown up seeing houses like this only on television, but she never believed that living in a beautiful place made someone better. "We're arriving," Gabriel warned, his voice tense. "I know," Luisa replied calmly. He parked in front of the main entrance. Before getting out of the car, he held her hand. "If anything happens, we leave. You don't have to endure anything that makes you feel bad." She looked into his eyes and saw love, but also guilt. Gabriel knew what was coming. He knew his mother wouldn't forgive, wouldn't accept, wouldn't make it easy. And yet, he was there, hoping that love would be enough to cross that minefield. "Let's go," Louisa said, opening the car door. They climbed the marble steps to the entrance door. Gabriel rang the bell, even though it was his own family's house. The door was opened by a uniformed maid, who greeted them formally and led them to the living room. And it was there, standing in that environment of excessive refinement, surrounded by expensive paintings and furniture that looked more like museum pieces than objects of use, that Louisa felt for the first time the real weight of what she was about to face. It wasn't fear. It was the acute awareness that in that house, every look would be an evaluation, every word would be a test, and every gesture would be judged under the cruel lens of prejudice disguised as elegance. Gabriel held her hand tighter. "They must already be in the dining room," he said softly. Louisa took a deep breath, raised her chin and walked beside him, ready to meet the family that had already condemned her before even knowing her name. The dining room was even more imposing than the rest of the house. A gigantic crystal chandelier hung from the high ceiling, shedding golden light over a mahogany table capable of easily seating 12 people. The chairs, upholstered in burgundy velvet, looked like thrones, and the walls were decorated with paintings that Louisa recognized as works by important Brazilian artists. Everything there screamed wealth, tradition, power. But for her, who had learned early on not to confuse luxury with value, that setting was just that, a setting. Everyone was already seated when Gabriel and Louisa entered. At the center of the table, in a position that made it clear who commanded that territory, was Donna Helena Fontana. She was around 55 years old but appeared younger, the result of aesthetic care that only money allowed. Her dark blonde hair was tied in an impeccable bun, and she wore a set of pearls that was probably worth more than Louisa's entire apartment. Her brown eyes analyzed the girl from head to toe in a single movement, quick and precise like that of a predator, evaluating prey. To Helena's right sat Marcelo Fontana, Gabriel's father, a tall man with graying hair who maintained an upright and formal posture. He raised his eyes briefly when they entered, but showed no great interest, as if his son's girlfriend's presence was just another social commitment to be fulfilled. On the other side was Mariana, Gabriel's younger sister, a 23-year-old girl wearing a designer dress and carrying the same expression of superiority as her mother. "Gabriel, you are late," said Helena, her voice firm but controlled. "We insist on punctuality in this house." "Sorry, Mother. The traffic was complicated on the marginal." Helena didn't reply. Her eyes were fixed on Louisa. "So this is the girl you talk so much about," she said. But there was no warmth in those words. It was a statement, not a reception. "Mother, Father, Mariana, this is Louisa." Gabriel made the introductions with his hand resting protectively on his girlfriend's back. "Louisa, my family." "Good evening," Louisa greeted politely, her voice firm. "It's a pleasure to meet you." "The pleasure is all ours," Marcelo replied mechanically, without taking his eyes off the empty plate in front of him. Mariana just nodded, a minimal movement that made it clear she wasn't interested in knowing the person behind that name at all. "Sit down," Helena ordered, pointing to the empty chairs. "The food is about to be served." Gabriel pulled out a chair for Louisa, who sat with the upright posture her mother had always taught her. "No matter where you are, Louisa," Donna Celia used to say, "sit with your head held high. No one has the right to make you bow." And there, surrounded by all that opulence and coldness, Louisa remembered those words. The maid began to serve the starter, a creamy soup in porcelain bowls so thin they seemed translucent. Louisa discreetly observed how the others picked up the spoon, which side to use, and followed the movements naturally. Not because she needed to copy them, but because she understood that in that environment, every gesture would be scrutinized. "So, Louisa," Helena began after a few minutes of awkward silence, "Gabriel told me you work with translation." "Yes, ma'am. I work as a freelance translator, mainly with English, Spanish, and Russian." "Russian," Helena repeated, raising an eyebrow. "How interesting, and where did you study that? At some private university?" There was poison in that question. Luisa noticed it immediately. Helena wasn't interested in the answer. She was testing, looking for gaps. I studied on my own, Donna Helena. I started with free materials on the internet and then took some online courses. I didn't have the opportunity to do a formal degree in languages, but I learned through a lot of dedication. Self-taught then. Helena took a sip of wine, her eyes never leaving Luisa's face. Admirable, although of course nothing replaces proper training at a prestigious institution. Mother, Gabriel intervened, clearly uncomfortable, Luisa is excellent at what she does. She doesn't need a diploma hanging on the wall to prove her knowledge. Of course not, dear. Helena smiled, but it was a cold smile. I'm just talking, getting to know the girl who won my son over better. Mariana let out a discreet giggle, quickly muffled by a sip of water. Marcelo continued eating in silence as if he weren't paying attention, but Luisa knew he heard every word. And your family, Luisa, Helena continued, do they also work with languages? No, ma'am, my mother is a cook and my father is a bus driver. The silence that followed was heavy. Mariana stopped moving her food. Marcelo finally looked up. Helena kept a neutral expression, but something changed in her gaze. It was as if a suspicion had been confirmed. How honest, Helena said after a calculated pause. Honest professions, no doubt, and where do you live? In Itaquera, Luisa replied without any shame in her voice. East Zone. East Zone, Mariana echoed as if she were talking about another planet. It's far from here, isn't it? Helena commented, taking another sip of wine. I imagine the contrast must be great for you. This region, Jardim Europa, is very different. It is different, yes, Luisa agreed calmly. But different doesn't mean better or worse. They are just distinct realities. Helena smiled again, that same smile that didn't reach her eyes. What a democratic view. Gabriel, you didn't tell me your girlfriend was so philosophical. Gabriel squeezed his cutlery tightly. Luisa lightly touched his hand under the table, a discreet gesture that said, I'm fine, you don't need to defend me yet. The main course was served, roasted lamb with spices accompanied by grilled vegetables and a sauce Luisa couldn't identify. Everything beautifully presented, as if it were art instead of food. She ate in silence, observing the dynamics of that family that seemed to function through unspoken codes. Mariana, her mother broke the silence, how is your international relations course going? Do you still intend to do the exchange program to France? Yes, Mother. I'm finishing the paperwork. In September, I'll be in Paris. Paris is wonderful, Helena commented. We have an apartment there, small but charming. You can use it whenever you want. Luisa chewed slowly, attentive to every word. That conversation wasn't innocent, it was a demonstration. Helena was making clear what kind of life the Fontana family led, what kind of privileges they had, what kind of world they inhabited. A world where apartments in Paris were minor details, where international exchanges were natural expectations, where everything revolved around status and appearance. And you, Luisa? Mariana asked suddenly. Have you ever traveled abroad? No, Luisa answered honestly. I haven't had that opportunity yet. Ah, what a pity, Mariana feigned compassion. Traveling is so important for broadening horizons, don't you think? I agree, said Luisa, keeping her voice calm. That's why I read a lot. Books also broaden horizons and they are more accessible. Marcelo let out a sound that could have been a muffled laugh. Helena shot him a quick warning look. Books are important, of course, said Helena, but nothing replaces the experience of knowing other cultures in person. Real immersion. You understand the difference, I imagine. I understand perfectly, Donna Helena, and I'm sure that when I have the means to travel, I will enjoy every moment. But I don't think a person's value is measured by the countries they've visited. The atmosphere became even more tense. Gabriel looked at his mother with an expression that mixed plea and irritation. Helena, however, seemed to be enjoying herself. No one is measuring your value, dear, she said, her voice soft but sharp. We are just talking, getting to know you. After all, Gabriel had never brought anyone to a family dinner. This is significant. It's significant because Luisa is important to me, Gabriel said, his voice firm. More important than anyone else I've ever met. Helena took another sip of wine, her eyes fixed on her son. I'm sure she's special, Gabriel. You've always had a good heart. Since you were little, you've always cared about the less fortunate. The sentence dropped like a bomb. Louisa felt the insult, veiled but evident. Helena hadn't called her inferior directly, but the message was clear. Louisa was her son's charity project, a noble cause, not an equal. "Mother," Gabriel's voice rose a tone, but Louisa squeezed his hand again. "It's okay, Gabriel," she said calmly. "Your mother is just being honest about what she thinks." Helena raised her eyebrows, surprised by the response. "I see that besides being studious, you are also perceptive. I learned to read between the lines, Donna Helena. Growing up without privileges teaches you that very early." The dinner continued, but the tension was palpable. Each dish served was accompanied by subtle comments, questions loaded with intention, silences that said more than words. Mariana seemed bored, Marcello remained distant, and Helena orchestrated everything with the precision of a conductor, leading a cruel symphony. When dessert arrived, a delicate soufflé served in crystal bowls, Helena finally changed tactics. "You know," she began, addressing everyone but looking mainly at Louisa, "our family has always taken pride in maintaining certain standards, not out of snobbery, but out of respect for our history, the legacy we've built over generations. Every choice we make reflects not just on us, but on everyone who carries the Fontana surname." Louisa knew exactly where that was going. "I understand the importance of family tradition," she replied. "My family also has its values. Values like honesty, hard work, and dignity. And those values don't depend on a surname or a bank account." Helena smiled, but this time there was something different in that smile. It was as if she had finally found what she was looking for, confirmation that Louisa would not bow easily. "How nice," she said. "Values are important, but you must agree that there are practical differences between social classes, differences that love cannot always overcome." Gabriel dropped his cutlery with force. "Mother, enough, you are being disrespectful." "I'm being realistic, Gabriel, and if this girl is as strong as she appears to be, she can hear the truth without being offended." Louisa took a deep breath. She looked at Helena, then at Gabriel, and made a decision. She wasn't going to leave, she wasn't going to bow, but she also wasn't going to lower herself to that woman's level. "The truth is that I came here today not to be approved, Donna Helena. I came because Gabriel wanted me to meet his family. If you judge me by where I was born or how much money I have, that's your problem, not mine. I know who I am, and that is enough for me." The silence that followed was absolute. Even Marcello stopped eating. Mariana stared open-mouthed. Gabriel held Luisa's hand over the table, a public gesture of support. Helena observed the scene carefully, and then, to everyone's surprise, she began to speak in Russian. The words came out fluidly, loaded with disdain, directed at Mariana and Marcello as if Louisa weren't there, as if she were just an object on the table, incapable of understanding. And Louisa heard every word, understood every intention, and decided to wait for the right moment to reveal that the humiliation had been witnessed in its entirety. The words in Russian flowed from Helena's mouth with the same elegance with that she held her wine glass. To someone who didn't understand the language, it might seem like just a casual, perhaps even sophisticated conversation. But Louisa understood every syllable, every nuance, every poison distilled in those seemingly harmless phrases. "Look at her," Helena said in Russian, addressing Mariana and Marcello, "sitting there as if she had some right to be at this table. Poor thing, she's probably never seen so much silver gathered in one place." Mariana let out a giggle, responding in the same language. "It's embarrassing, Mother. Look at the way she holds her cutlery. Even in that you can tell she doesn't have a refined education." Marcello took a sip of wine, observing Louisa with that distant expression he had maintained all night. "Helena, don't be so harsh," he said in Russian, but without any real conviction. "The girl seems polite within her limitations." "Polite," Helena repeated with contempt. "Being polite is the least expected of anyone. But look at her, Marcello. Coming from Itaquera, without formal academic training, parents who work in manual labor, she has absolutely nothing that justifies being beside our son. Nothing beyond his naivety in confusing pity with love." Louisa kept her eyes down, pretending to concentrate on the dessert plate in front of her. The soufflé was delicious, but she could barely taste it. Every word she heard was like a needle prick, not because she doubted herself, but because it confirmed everything she already knew. For that family, She would never be seen as a person, only as inadequate. Gabriel noticed the change in the environment. He didn't understand Russian, but he knew his mother well enough to know when she was attacking. "Mother, what are you saying?" he asked, his voice tense. "Nothing much, dear," Helena replied in Portuguese, smiling sweetly. "I just commented to your father and sister about how interesting it is to meet people from different backgrounds. Enriching, don't you think?" Luisa raised her eyes and met Helena's gaze. For a brief moment, something passed between them, a spark of silent challenge. Helena testing to see if there was any sign of comprehension. Luisa keeping her mask perfectly adjusted. Gabriel didn't seem convinced, but he didn't insist. Luisa knew he was torn between defending her and avoiding a major confrontation with his family. She didn't blame him. That was his world. Those were the people he loved, despite everything. Breaking from that wasn't simple. Helena went back to speaking in Russian, now with even more cruelty. "She is beautiful, I'll admit. Gabriel always had an eye for attractive women, but beauty doesn't pay bills, doesn't open doors, doesn't sustain the standard of living our son is used to. How long do you think, Mariana, until he realizes the mistake he's making?" Mariana played with her spoon, clearly enjoying the moment. "I don't know, Mother. Maybe when she starts asking to borrow money, or when he needs to introduce her at important events and feels ashamed of the way she dresses, how she speaks, of everything that evidences the poverty she came from." "You are being mean, Mariana," said Marcelo, but still without real force. "The girl didn't choose to be born poor." "She didn't choose to be born poor," Helena agreed, "but she chose to get involved with someone who is completely out of her reality. And that, Marcelo, shows a lack of sense of place. It shows ambition disguised as love." Luisa squeezed the napkin on her lap, her fingers white from the force. She breathed slowly, deeply, trying to control the anger that was starting to boil inside. It wasn't anger at the humiliation itself. It was anger at seeing how those people who had everything were so empty inside, how they confused wealth with superiority, how they used money to justify cruelty. "And if Gabriel insists on this relationship," Mariana asked in Russian, "what are we going to do?" Helena smiled, a calculated and cold smile. "Gabriel is an idealist, but he's not an idiot. When he realizes that this girl doesn't fit into our world, that she will always be a weight, a flat note in any environment we frequent, he will end it. And if he doesn't end it himself, we will help him see reality." "How?" Mariana wanted to know, her eyes shining with morbid curiosity. "There are ways, dear. There are always ways to make someone realize they don't belong in a certain place. We don't need to be rude or direct. We just need to create situations that highlight the differences, that put her in uncomfortable positions. More dinners like this, social events where she feels completely out of place, introductions to influential people where it will be clear she doesn't have the necessary repertoire. Eventually, she herself will give up. And if she doesn't give up, Gabriel will get tired of having to explain her, defend her, justify her." Luisa felt something break inside her. It wasn't the pain of rejection. It was the brutal clarity that that woman not only despised her, but was actively planning to destroy what she and Gabriel had built. There was something systematic in that cruelty, something that went beyond casual prejudice. It was strategy. It was power being used to crush someone considered inferior. Gabriel touched her arm gently. "So are you okay?" he asked in a low voice. "I am," Luisa lied, forcing a small smile. "Do you want to leave?" Part of her wanted to scream yes, wanted to get out of that house and never come back. But the other part, the part that had learned to resist forever, knew that leaving now would be giving Helena exactly what she wanted. It would confirm that Luisa wasn't strong enough, that she didn't really belong to that world. "No," she replied firmly. "I'm fine, we can stay." Gabriel seemed surprised but also relieved. He squeezed her hand discreetly, a gesture of support that at that moment meant more than 1,000 words. Helena observed the interaction with eagle eyes. She went back to speaking in Russian, now directly about what she had just witnessed. "Look how he protects her. It's pathetic. Gabriel has always been like this since he was a child, always attaching himself to lost causes, always wanting to save those who cannot be saved. Remember Marcelo, when he wanted to adopt that stray dog, or when he insisted on giving tutoring classes to the children of employees. This sense of social justice of his is a weakness, not a virtue. Marcelo sighed, tired. Helena, maybe you should give the girl a chance. Gabriel seems really interested. Interested? Helena repeated with disdain. He was also interested in that phase when he wanted to drop out of business school to do social work. Interest passes, Marcelo. Responsibility to the family name, that remains. Dinner was coming to an end. The dessert plates were cleared and the maid brought coffee and petit fours. Helena continued making comments in Russian, each more cutting than the last. She talked about Luisa's simple clothes, about the lack of jewelry, about the way she spoke that gave away her humble origins. Mariana contributed mean observations. Marcelo remained mostly silent, and Gabriel tried to maintain conversations in Portuguese that would ease the tension. But Luisa heard everything. Every word, every criticism, every malicious plan, and with every passing minute, her determination grew. She wasn't going to give Helena the pleasure of seeing her break. She wasn't going to confirm that woman's prejudices. She was going to keep being exactly who she was, with her head held high and her dignity intact. You need to understand, Gabriel, Helena said finally, returning to Portuguese after several minutes of speaking only in Russian, that marriage is not just about love. It's about compatibility, about building a life together on solid foundations. And those foundations include origin, education, shared values. My mother is right, Mariana agreed. You can fall in love with whoever you want, Gabriel, but you have to think about the future. How this person will fit into our family, into our social circles. Luisa is not a fit, Mariana, Gabriel countered, his voice raised. She is a person, and I'm not going to measure her value by your approval. No one is measuring her value, Helena said calmly, but there was steel in her voice. We are just being practical, and we expect you to be too. The environment was electrified. Luisa felt she was at the center of a storm, but remained motionless, serene, like the eye of the hurricane. She knew that any emotional reaction would be used against her, would be seen as proof that she didn't have the necessary control to deal with that world. I think it's time for us to go, Gabriel said, standing up. Already? Helena questioned, her eyebrow raised. Dinner has barely finished. Yes, Mother, already. Luisa stood up too, picking up the small purse she had left beside the chair. She looked at Helena, at Mariana, at Marcelo, and gave a slight bow of her head. Thank you for dinner, Donna Helena. It was very enlightening. There was something in that thank you that made Helena frown slightly, an ambiguity she couldn't completely decipher. But before she could reply, Gabriel was already leading Luisa out of the dining room. They walked down the hallway in silence. Luisa kept her posture upright, her steps firm, but inside she was falling apart. Not out of weakness, but because of the weight of what she had witnessed. It wasn't just about her. It was about how that family functioned, about the values they defended, about the kind of people they were when they thought no one was paying attention. At the entrance door, Gabriel stopped and held her hands. Luisa, I'm so sorry, truly. My mother was horrible, and I shouldn't have put you in this situation. She looked at him, seeing the anguish etched on his face. You didn't put me in anything, Gabriel. I came of my own free will, and now I know exactly what we are dealing with. He pulled her into a tight hug. Don't listen to what she said, please. You are worth more than any opinion my family might have. Luisa pulled away slightly, looking into his eyes. I know my value, Gabriel. I've always known the problem isn't me. The problem has never been me. They left the mansion, got into the car, and drove in silence through the streets of Jardim Europa. Luisa looked out the window, seeing the luxurious houses pass by, each one larger and more imposing than the other. And she thought about how all that luxury meant nothing when the people behind the beautiful facades were so small inside. Gabriel dropped her off at her apartment in São Mateus. Before getting out of the car, he held her hand once more. I love you, Luisa, and I won't let my family destroy what we have. She smiled, a tired but genuine smile. I love you too, Gabriel. But you need to understand that this battle isn't just yours, it's mine too, and I'm going to fight it my way. He nodded, not fully understanding what she meant, but trusting her. Luisa entered the building, climbed the stairs to the third floor, and opened the door to the small apartment she called home. She dropped her purse on the sofa, took off her shoes, and went to the window. From there, she could see the city lights, The São Paulo she knew, the real São Paulo, far from the mansions and manufactured luxury. And then, alone in that space that was hers alone, Luisa allowed herself to feel everything she had suppressed during dinner. The anger, the sadness, the indignation. But she didn't cry. She didn't allow herself that relief yet, because she knew it wasn't over. Helena had declared war, even without knowing that Luisa had understood every word. And now, Luisa needed to decide when and how she would respond. The truth could no longer be hidden. Luisa knew exactly what that family thought of her, and soon they would know that she had heard every word, understood every insult, witnessed every second of that cruelty disguised as sophistication. 3 days had passed since that dinner. 3 days in which Luisa lived in a kind of emotional limbo, balancing between anger and the need to act intelligently. Gabriel called every day, worried, noticing that something had changed in her, although he didn't know exactly what. She reassured him, said everything was fine, that she just needed some time to process everything. But everything was not fine. And Luisa knew it wouldn't be until she did what needed to be done. It was on Wednesday night that she made the decision. She was at home translating a contract in English when her phone rang. It was Gabriel. "Luisa, my mother wants to have another dinner. This time more informal," she said. "I think it's her way of apologizing without admitting she was wrong." Luisa felt something tighten in her chest. It wasn't fear, it was determination. "When?" she asked. "Saturday. She insisted a lot. Said she wants a second chance to get to know you properly. A second chance. As if the problem had been a lack of opportunity and not pure malice." "I'll go," Luisa said calmly. "Are you sure? I don't want you to feel obligated." "I'm sure, Gabriel, very sure." There was something in her voice that he couldn't fully decipher, but he interpreted it as courage, as strength to face his family again. And in a way, it was exactly that. On Saturday, Luisa got ready with the same care as the first time. Simple dress, light makeup, hair tied back, but this time, there was something different in her eyes, a determination that wasn't there before. She knew exactly what she was going to do. Gabriel came to pick her up, and throughout the entire journey to Jardim Europa, he held her hand. "Thank you for giving them another chance," he said. "I know it wasn't easy last time." Luisa just smiled. If he knew how much it hadn't been easy, maybe he wouldn't have asked her to return. But she said nothing. Some truths needed to be revealed at the right moment, in front of the right people. When they arrived at the mansion, Helena received them at the door. She was wearing a light pink set, perfectly coordinated with the pearls she wore. Her smile was rehearsed, polished, fake. "Luisa, how good that you accepted our invitation. I hope that this time we can have a more pleasant conversation." "I hope so too, Donna Helena," Luisa replied, keeping her voice polite. They entered the same dining room, but this time the table was set less formally. Only 6 places instead of the 12 the table could accommodate. Marcelo and Mariana were already seated, and there was someone else, a grey-haired woman Luisa didn't know. "This is Olga," Helena introduced. "Our housekeeper. She is from Russia. She's lived with us for over 20 years. I thought it would be interesting for you to meet her, since Gabriel told me you study Russian." Olga smiled shyly, clearly uncomfortable being seated at the table with the employers. Luisa understood immediately what Helena was doing. Another test, another way to highlight the differences. Placing Luisa beside the maid, as if they both belonged to the same category. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Olga," Luisa said in Portuguese, smiling sincerely. The housekeeper seemed relieved by the kindness. The dinner began, and this time Helena seemed more contained. She asked polite questions about Luisa's work, her future plans, her family. Everything very civilized, very polished. But Luisa knew how to read between the lines. Every question was a probe. Every comment had a second intention. "So, Luisa," Helena began after the starter, "Gabriel told me you learned Russian on your own. That is truly admirable. Olga, don't you think it's impressive?" Olga nodded, but there was discomfort in her eyes. She knew Helena well enough to know that nothing that came out of her mouth was innocent. "It's a difficult language," Marcelo commented. "Too complex for me." "For me too," Mariana agreed. "I prefer French, more useful, more elegant." Helena took a sip of wine, her eyes fixed on Luisa. "It must be fascinating to learn a language like that. so distant from our reality. Although I wonder what the practical use of Russian would be here in Brazil, for someone who doesn't work with high-level foreign trade. The observation came wrapped in curiosity, but the criticism was clear. Louisa was wasting time on something useless, something above her capacity for real use. Russian taught me discipline, Louisa replied calmly. It taught me that I can learn anything if I dedicate myself enough, and it gave me access to a very rich literature and culture. How nice, said Helena. Discipline is important. Olga, do you agree? The housekeeper nodded again, increasingly tense. Louisa realized the woman knew exactly what was happening and hated being part of it. The dinner proceeded, and Helena began to get more relaxed, more confident. She thought she had tamed Louisa, that the girl had come back submissive, ready to accept her place. And it was then, when Helena's guard dropped, that she made the fatal mistake. Olga, Helena began in Russian, can you bring more wine from the cellar, the red that is on the middle shelf? Yes, ma'am, Olga replied in Russian, standing up quickly. But before she left the room, Helena continued talking, now looking at Mariana and Marcelo. It's so convenient to have someone who speaks Russian at home. We can talk about anything without others understanding, like at that first dinner. It was liberating to be able to tell the truth without having to measure words. Mariana laughed, responding in Russian. Yes, mother. Although I think she suspected something, did you see how quiet she was? She was quiet because she had nothing to say, countered Helena. Girls like her learn early to be quiet in front of those who are superior. It's survival instinct. Louisa kept her eyes on her plate, chewing slowly, waiting. Her heart beat fast, but on the outside she was the image of serenity. Anyway, Helena continued in Russian, I'm being polite today because Gabriel asked, but this farce has an expiration date. A few more weeks and he will realize she is a dead weight, a stone tied around his neck. Marcelo sighed in Russian, tired. Helena, you promised to give her a chance. I am giving it, dear. I'm being kind, I'm smiling, I'm pretending it doesn't bother me to have a favelada sitting at my table. The word dropped like a slap. Favelada. Helena had crossed all the lines. And it was at that moment that Louisa decided it was time. She raised her eyes slowly, first looking at Helena, then at Mariana, then at Marcelo. And then, with a clear and firm voice, she replied in perfect Russian. I am not from a favela, Donna Helena. I am from Itaquera. And there is a difference between coming from a humble place and being humble as a person. You, for example, come from a privileged place, but you don't possess a shred of humility or decency. The silence that followed was absolute. Helena turned pale. Mariana dropped her fork with a crash. Marcelo's eyes widened. Gabriel looked from Louisa to his mother, trying to understand what had happened. Olga, who was returning with the wine, stopped at the door, open-mouthed. Paus, Helena began, but the words failed. I understand Russian, Donna Helena, Louisa continued, now in Portuguese so Gabriel would also understand. I understand perfectly, and I understood every word you said at the first dinner, every malicious comment, every insult disguised as sophistication, every cruel plan to distance me from your son. Gabriel stood up abruptly. What? He looked at his mother. Mother, what did you say? Helena tried to regain her composure, but she was visibly shaken. I didn't, she began, but Louisa interrupted her. You said I was too poor to be beside Gabriel. You said I was embarrassing, that I didn't have a refined education, that my parents worked in manual labor as if that were a reason for shame. You said Gabriel's interest in me was pity, not love, that I was a lost cause, a dead weight. Gabriel turned to his mother, his face red with anger. You said that. You humiliated her, thinking she wouldn't understand. Helena raised her chin, trying to retake control. Gabriel, you don't understand. I was trying to protect you. Protect me? From what, mother? From an honest, hard-working woman who built everything herself without needing a surname or money. Protect me from the first person who loves me for who I am, not for what I have. Louisa continued, her voice firm but loaded with emotion. You plan to destroy me, Donna Helena. You plan to create situations that would make me feel out of place, inadequate. You wanted me to give up on my own, so that no guilt would be left on your hands, and all this while smiling in my face and pretending to be polite. Mariana tried to defend her mother, her voice weak. You understood wrong. Mother didn't mean— I understood perfectly, Mariana. Louisa cut her off. You also participated. You laughed at my table manners, mocked my clothes, agreed with every cruelty your mother said. You, who have everything, who never had to fight for anything, thought you had the right to judge me. Gabriel punched the table, making the cutlery jump. How could you? How could you do this? We did it for your own good, insisted Helena, but her voice was trembling. You don't see the differences that are obvious to everyone. This girl does not belong to our world. That was when Louisa stood up, keeping her dignity intact. You are right about one thing, Donna Helena. I don't belong to your world. I don't belong to a world where people are measured by their bank accounts, where cruelty is acceptable when it comes wrapped in good manners, where humiliating others is considered family protection. I grew up in a world where people have much less, but are much more, where neighbors help each other, where honest workers raise children with dignity, where no one needs to speak in another language to hide their own malice. Helena tried to reply, but Louisa wasn't finished. I came here today because I wanted you to know that I heard everything. That every cruel word you said thinking you were safe was witnessed, and I wanted you to know that even so, even knowing how much you despise me, I do not bow. I don't ask for your approval, and I don't need your acceptance. I know who I am, and that is more than you can say for yourself. Gabriel went to Louisa and held her hands. I'm so sorry, he said, tears in his eyes. I'm so sorry. It's not your fault, Gabriel. You didn't know. But he looked at his mother with an expression Louisa had never seen before. It wasn't anger. It was deep disappointment, the kind that changes relationships forever. Mother, I've spent my whole life respecting you, accepting your rules, your standards, your demands, but that's over. You crossed a line that cannot be undone. Helena stood up, trying to keep control of the situation. Gabriel, you are being dramatic. Sit down and let's talk like adults. No, Mother, I won't sit down and we won't talk, because there is nothing you can say that justifies what you did. Mariana tried to intervene, but Gabriel silenced her with a look. And you, Mariana, you who always complained when someone judged you by your appearance or for being a woman, you did exactly that to Louisa. You judged, humiliated, mocked. And why? Because Mother told you to. Mariana lowered her eyes without an answer. Marcelo finally spoke up, his voice tired. Helena, you went too far this time. I did what any mother would do, she countered, but no longer with the firmness from before. I protected my son from a wrong choice. The wrong choice, said Gabriel, his voice low but firm, was me taking so long to see who you really are. Louisa showed me in 3 days more character than you demonstrated in an entire lifetime. And with those words, Gabriel took Louisa's hand and walked toward the exit. Helena took a step forward, her voice breaking. Gabriel, if you leave now, you are choosing her over your family. He stopped, turned, and looked at his mother one last time. No, Mother, I'm choosing what is right over what is convenient. And if that means choosing her, then yes, that is exactly what I'm doing. And they left, leaving behind a family in shock, a lie unmasked and a truth that could never be hidden again. The days following that dinner were difficult for everyone involved, each in their own way. Gabriel practically cut off contact with the family, responding only to essential messages from his father about the company and completely ignoring Helena's insistent calls. Mariana tried to make contact a few times, but he made it clear he needed time, a lot of time, to process everything that had happened. Louisa, for her part, continued her routine: work, translations, day-to-day commitments. But inside, something had changed. It wasn't the victory of having unmasked Helena that transformed her. It was the certainty that she had remained true to herself, even in the face of the worst of storms. She had not bowed, she had not begged for acceptance, she had not diminished herself to fit into a space that was not made for her. Gabriel spent nights at her apartment, needing to be near someone who made him feel there was still authenticity in the world. One night, lying on the small living room sofa, he finally verbalized what he had been carrying. I spent my whole life defending my mother, justifying her way, saying she was just rigorous, that she had high standards. But it wasn't that. She is cruel, Louisa, and I closed my eyes to that because it was easier than facing the truth. Louisa stroked his hair. You couldn't have known what she was saying in Russian, and it's hard to see the flaws in those we love. But I should have noticed sooner. The signs were always there. The way she treated the employees, how she spoke about people she considered inferior, how she measured everyone's value by their bank account. I saw all that and ignored it because she was my mother. She hugged him tighter. The important thing is that now you see, and you are willing to do differently. But the pain of that breakup was real. Gabriel loved his mother despite everything, and discovering that she was capable of such cruelty left him lost, as if the ground had disappeared from under his feet. Meanwhile, at the Yardim Europa mansion, Helena lived with her own demons. In the first few days after the confrontation, she refused to admit any error. She told Marcelo that Gabriel was being manipulated, that Luisa had planned everything to create a dramatic scene, that it was just a passing whim of his. But Marcelo, who had always been quieter and less involved in his wife's maneuvers, finally took a stand. "Helena, you humiliated that girl. You planned to destroy our son's relationship. And worse, you did all that thinking you would get away with it because no one would understand the Russian." "I was protecting our son," she insisted, but her voice no longer had the same conviction. Protecting from what? From an honest woman who loves him. From someone who has more character in her pinky finger than many of the people who frequent our house. Helena looked at her husband, surprised. Marcelo never contradicted her, never questioned her decisions. "Are you on her side now?" she asked, incredulous. "I'm not on anyone's side, Helena. I'm just tired of pretending I don't see the obvious. You went too far and you lost our son because of it." The words hurt more than Helena wanted to admit, because deep down, beneath all the layers of pride and arrogance, she knew Marcelo was right. Mariana also went through her own journey of self-questioning. Sitting in her room, remembering the dinner, she saw herself in that dining room laughing at her mother's comments, agreeing with every cruelty. And for the first time in her life, she felt ashamed of herself. She had always been raised to judge. Since she was little, she learned that there were right people and wrong people, appropriate places and inadequate places, correct ways and vulgar ways of living. Her mother had taught her that the Fontanas were superior, that they had the right to look down on others, and Mariana never questioned that. Until now. She began to rethink every interaction she had with Luisa. The girl had been nothing but polite, dignified and respectful, and yet Mariana had treated her as less. Why? Because she came from Itacara? Because her parents worked in jobs Mariana considered lesser? Because she didn't have the money the Fontana family had? The shame grew. And with it, something Mariana had never felt before, the desire to apologize. It was on a Thursday that she finally gathered the courage to call Gabriel. "Hi, Mari," he answered, his voice neutral. "Gabriel, I need to talk to you, in person if possible." He hesitated, but agreed. They arranged to meet at a cafe in Villa Maddalena, neutral territory, far from the mansion and painful memories. When they sat across from each other, Mariana noticed how her brother was different, more serious, more mature, as if he had aged years in a matter of days. "I came to apologize," she began bluntly, "for what I did, for what I said, for having participated in Mother's cruelty." Gabriel took a sip of coffee, waiting. "I spent my whole life following her example," Mariana continued, her voice choked up. "Learning to judge, to measure people by the wrong criteria. And when you brought Luisa, I did exactly what Mother taught me. I looked at her and only saw what was missing, not what she had." "And what do you see now?" asked Gabriel. "I see a woman you love, a woman who had more dignity in one night than I had in my entire life, a woman who gave us a lesson in character that no expensive university could teach." Gabriel felt a lump in his throat. "I also apologize for having stayed quiet when I should have spoken, for having laughed when I should have defended, for having been so small." "You can apologize to her," Gabriel said. "Not to me. I want to, but I'm afraid she won't receive me." "She will. Luisa isn't like us, Mari. She doesn't hold a grudge, but she also doesn't forget, and she will expect you to be sincere." Mariana nodded, wiping away a stray tear. "And Mother?" Gabriel asked after a silence. "How is she?" Mariana sighed. "Lost. She won't admit it, but she is. Dad is distant, you cut off contact, and she is alone with her own actions for the first time in her life." "She needs to understand what she did," Gabriel said firmly. "I'm not going back just because she's sorry. I need to see real change, not just convenient remorse." While Gabriel and Mariana talked, Luisa received an unexpected visit at her apartment. When she opened the door, she found Olga, the Russian housekeeper, holding a small basket of homemade bread. "Olga, what a surprise," said Luisa, inviting her in. The woman entered timidly, clearly uncomfortable. "I came to apologize," she said in Russian, thinking it would be easier to express herself in her native language, "for having stayed quiet that night, for not having defended you." Luisa made tea, and they sat at the small kitchen table. "You had no obligation to defend me, Olga. I know you depend on that job. But I should have had courage. I've known Donna Helena for 20 years. I know how she is with people she considers inferior. And seeing you there, hearing all that and keeping calm, made me realize how much of a coward I am." "You are not a coward. You survive. It's different." Olga took a sip of tea. "When you replied in Russian at that second dinner, I felt so much pride. It was as if you had done what I never had the courage to do. You faced her, showed that you understood everything, and left with your head held high." Luisa smiled. "I had that courage because I have nothing to lose, Olga. You have a job, stability. I understand your choices. Even so, I wanted you to know that I admire you very much." They talked for almost 2 hours, two women from different worlds but united by the common experience of being underestimated by those with more power. When Olga left, Luisa felt something warming her chest. It wasn't just about Gabriel, about their love. It was about finding allies in the most unexpected places. A month passed. Gabriel and Luisa remained together, stronger than before. Mariana had sought out Luisa and apologized sincerely. And although Luisa hadn't forgotten what happened, she accepted the apology and opened space for Mariana to show, through actions, that she had changed. Helena, however, remained distant, too proud to apologize but too unhappy to move on. Marcelo spent more and more time at the office, avoiding the house that had become a mausoleum of heavy silences. It was Marcelo who finally confronted his wife on a rainy Tuesday night. "Helena, this has to end. You are losing your family out of pure pride." "I won't humiliate myself by apologizing to that girl," she countered. "It's not humiliation, it's responsibility. You were cruel, Helena, deliberately cruel, and the only way to fix this is to admit the error." "And if I admit it and Gabriel still doesn't come back?" Marcelo looked at her with deep sadness. "Then at least you will go to sleep knowing you did the right thing. And maybe, just maybe, you'll be able to look at yourself in the mirror without feeling ashamed." The words hit Helena like a punch. Shame. She had always prided herself on never feeling ashamed of anything. But now, alone in that huge house without her son, with a distant husband and a daughter questioning everything she had taught, Helena began to feel something she never imagined feeling. Doubt about who she was, about what she had built, about whether all that wealth and status were worth anything compared to the void that now lived inside her. Gabriel and Luisa were having dinner at a simple restaurant in Pinheiros when he received a message. It was from his father. "Your mother wants to talk. No audience, no games, just the two of you. She's ready to listen." Gabriel showed the message to Luisa. "What do you think?" he asked. "I think you need to decide if you are ready for this conversation. Don't do it for your mother. Do it for yourself." He thought for a long moment, looking at the woman he loved, the woman who had stood firm when everything fell apart. "I'm going to talk to her," he decided, "but you are coming with me." Luisa raised her eyebrows. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. You were by my side when she tried to separate us. You'll be by my side when I decide if there is any way to rebuild this bridge." And so, in a decision that would change everyone's course, Gabriel scheduled the meeting. He didn't know what he expected from that conversation, but he knew one thing. He would not go back on his convictions. He would not minimize what had happened, and he would not accept less than the complete and honest truth from a woman who had spent her entire life hiding her own weaknesses behind a mask of superiority. The meeting was set for a Saturday afternoon, at a time when the golden light of the São Paulo sun entered through the mansion's windows, creating long shadows in the hallways. Gabriel and Luisa arrived together, holding hands, a united front before what was to come. Marcelo received them at the door, a sad smile on his face. "She's in the living room," he warned, "and she's nervous. I've never seen her so nervous." Gabriel nodded and followed with Luisa down the familiar hallway that now seemed completely different. Every painting on the wall, every piece of expensive furniture, every detail of that house that once represented security and family now carried the weight of everything that had happened. Helena was standing by the window looking at the garden. She was wearing a simple dress without the jewelry she used to flaunt, her hair loose instead of the impeccable bun. When she heard the footsteps, she turned slowly. There was something different in her eyes. It was no longer that arrogant security, that certainty of always being right. "Gabriel," she said, her voice softer than he remembered. "Louisa." "Mother," Gabriel replied, keeping his distance. There was a long and uncomfortable silence. Helena looked at Louisa, and for the first time she seemed to really see her, not as a threat, not as inadequate, but as a person. "I asked you to come because I need to say a few things," Helena began, and for the first time in decades her voice trembled. "And those things are not easy for me." "We're listening," said Gabriel, but there was no warmth in his voice. It was an opportunity, not guaranteed forgiveness. Helena took a deep breath. "I've spent the last few weeks thinking a lot, about who I am, about how I raised you, about the values I defended my whole life, and I realized something that terrifies me." She paused, as if the next words physically cost her. "I realized that I became exactly the kind of person I myself would despise if I were on the other side." Louisa remained in silence, just observing. This wasn't her conversation yet. It was Gabriel and Helena's. "When you were born, Gabriel," Helena continued, "I swore I would give you everything. The best education, the best opportunities, the best of everything. But at some point, I confused giving the best with teaching that we were the best. And that is a crucial difference that only now I understand." Gabriel crossed his arms, listening. "I was raised in a family where status was everything. My mother taught me that our social position defined us, that we had to protect our image above anything else. And I absorbed that so deeply that I passed it on to you without even questioning it. I taught Mariana and you to judge people by their origin, by their money, by their appearance. And in doing so, I stole something very important from you, the ability to see people's true value." She looked directly at Louisa now. "I judged you even before I met you, Louisa. I saw where you came from, what your parents did, and I decided it wasn't enough. Not because you had done anything wrong, but because you didn't fit the perfect image I had created for my son's life." Louisa kept a neutral expression, but inside she was attentive to every word, every nuance. "And when I met you in person and saw that Gabriel truly loved you, I was afraid," Helena admitted, and there were tears starting to form in her eyes. "Fear of losing my son, fear that he would choose a different path than what I planned, fear that you would be happy in a way I never understood how to be. What you did then," said Gabriel, his voice hard, "was try to destroy that. Using a language you thought she didn't understand, you humiliated me, humiliated her, and showed exactly who you are when you think no one is watching." "I know." Helena let the tears fall now. "And there is no excuse for that. There is no explanation that justifies the cruelty, the deliberate planning to make you separate, the malice disguised as maternal protection." It was then that Louisa finally spoke, her voice calm but firm. "Donna Helena, I understand that you are repentant, and I believe that this repentance is real, but you need to understand that the problem was not just what you said about me, it was what it revealed about how you see the world." Helena nodded, wiping away tears. "When you called me a favelada," Louisa continued, "when you said I was embarrassing, that my parents worked in manual labor as if that were a shame, you weren't just attacking me. You were attacking millions of people who work honestly, who raise children with dignity, who build dignified lives without privileges." "I know," whispered Helena. "And when you planned to make me feel out of place at social events, when you wanted to use the class difference to separate us, you were perpetuating exactly the kind of injustice that keeps people like me away from opportunities we deserve. Not for lack of ability, but for lack of the right surname or enough bank account." Helena sat down slowly in an armchair, as if her legs wouldn't support her anymore. "You're right, entirely right. And I don't know if there is anything I can do to fix what I did." "Fixing," said Gabriel, "is not about an apology, Mother. It's about real change. It's about recognizing that your values were wrong and rebuilding from zero." Helena looked at her son, then at Louisa. "I want to try. I don't know if I'll manage to change completely. It's 55 years of thinking one way, but I want to try. For you, but mainly for myself, because I realized I lived an entire life surrounded by luxury but empty of truth, and I don't want to die like that." There was a long silence. Gabriel looked at Louisa, seeking guidance. She lightly touched his hand, a gesture that said, "The decision is yours." "Mother," Gabriel said finally, "I'm not going to pretend everything is fine. It's not. You disappointed me deeply. But I'm also not going to pretend you're not my mother, and that I don't want to have you in my life." Helena raised her eyes, a spark of hope appearing. "But," he continued firmly, "it will be on my terms. Louisa is part of my life, and if you want to be part of it too, you'll have to accept that. Not just tolerate it, but really accept it. And respect it." "I accept," Helena said quickly, "and I will prove it." "You don't need to prove it now," Louisa intervened softly. "You just need to be sincere, and understand that rebuilding trust takes time. A lot of time." Helena nodded, wiping her face. "Can I ask a question?" she said, looking at Louisa. "When did you decide you were going to confront me? When did you know you understood Russian?" Louisa thought for a moment. "I decided the moment you planned to destroy me. Not because I wanted to take revenge, but because I realized that if I didn't show that I had heard everything, you would continue doing this to other people, and someone needed to show that cruelty, even when it comes from those who have power and money, has consequences." Helena lowered her eyes. "You gave me a lesson that no university could give. You showed me that dignity has no price and that character cannot be bought." Louisa didn't smile, but her expression softened a little. "Donna Helena, I didn't come from Itaquera, ashamed of my past. I came proud of what I built. My parents worked hard all their lives to give me opportunities. I studied, I dedicated myself, I learned languages, I built a career. And none of that is less valuable, because I didn't have money or an important surname. In fact, it's more valuable, because it was conquered without shortcuts." "Oh, you are right," said Helena, "completely right. And if you really want to rebuild this bridge, you need to understand this not just with your head but with your heart. You need to look at people like my parents, like Olga, like so many others who work honestly, and see them as equals. Not as inferiors who deserve pity or condescension, but as equals who deserve respect." Helena stayed in silence for a long moment, processing every word. "I can try," she said finally. "I don't promise it will be easy or fast, but I can try." Marcelo entered the room at that moment, as if he had been waiting outside. He looked at Helena, then at Gabriel and Louisa. "Your mother has many flaws," he said, "but when she decides to do something, she does it with determination. If she promised to try, she will try for real." Gabriel nodded slowly. "So we'll see. But mother, one thing needs to be clear. If at any moment you go back to treating Louisa with disrespect, if you try to manipulate situations, if you use your power or money to separate us, I'm leaving. And this time, it will be forever." "I understand," said Helena, and there was sincerity in her voice, "and I accept." The meeting ended without hugs, without great emotional reconciliations, just a fragile beginning, a possibility of reconstruction. Gabriel and Louisa left the mansion knowing that the path ahead would be difficult, full of tests and relapses, but also knowing that they had remained firm in their values. In the car returning to San Mateus, Gabriel held Louisa's hand. "Thank you," he said. "Why? For showing me what it is to have dignity, for not having bowed, not having accepted less than you deserved, not having let my mother make you feel smaller." Louisa smiled. "I learned that from my parents, Gabriel, from people who work every day without glamour, without recognition, but with their heads held high. They taught me that value is not measured in money." "And it was that lesson that changed my whole family," he said. "Mariana is different. My father is more present, and even my mother, for the first time in her life, is questioning her certainties." "Change is difficult," said Louisa, "but possible for those who really want it." Weeks passed. Helena began bit by bit to make small but significant changes. She started talking more with Olga, not as a boss, but as a person interested in knowing her story. She began to question her own prejudices when they appeared. It wasn't perfect, far from it. There were relapses, moments when the old pattern returned. but there was genuine effort. Mariana became friends with Luisa, discovering in her a strength she had never found in friends from her social circle. She learned to question her own privileges, to see beyond appearances. And Gabriel and Luisa continued building their life together. It wasn't a fairy tale where everything was magically resolved. It was real, with challenges, with difficult moments, with Gabriel's family still learning to completely accept a reality different from what they imagined. But they stayed together. Because true love is not about finding someone perfect or living in a world without problems. It's about finding someone who makes you want to be better, who shows you difficult truths, who stays by your side even when the world tries to push you apart. And Luisa never forgot where she came from. She continued living in São Mateus, continued visiting her parents in Itaquera, continued being exactly who she always was. Because she understood from very early on that a person's true value is not in how much money they have or in which neighborhood they live, but in how they treat others, in how they stay firm in the face of adversity, in how they choose dignity even when it would be easier to bow. A year after that first dinner, Gabriel asked Luisa to marry him. Not at a luxurious party or an expensive restaurant. He asked at her house, surrounded by the simple things that made that space a home. And when she said yes, it was because she knew he loved her exactly as she was, without needing her to change, without wanting her to become someone else. The ceremony was simple, gathering the two families. Helena was there, visibly uncomfortable in the modest hall Luisa had chosen, but present, making an effort, trying. Dona Celia and Seu Mario received the Fontanas with the natural kindness of those who never confused simplicity with a lack of value. And on that day, two realities met. They didn't merge completely because they were too different for that, but they respected each other. And that was already a lot. In the end, the story of Luisa and Gabriel was not about a poor girl who won over a rich family. It was about a woman who refused to be diminished, who kept her dignity in the face of cruelty, who showed that greatness is not measured in bank figures, but in character. It was about a man who learned to question the values he received ready-made, who chose what was right over what was convenient, who understood that truly loving means defending the one you love, not hiding them. And it was about a family that had to face its own flaws, that discovered that sophistication without empathy is just disguised arrogance, that understood that privilege comes with the responsibility to be better, not with the right to feel superior. Luisa continued being a translator, building her career with the same effort and dedication as always. She never depended on Gabriel's money. She never wanted to, because she knew that independence was an essential part of who she was. And Gabriel respected that, admired that, loved that about her, loved that about. Years later, when they had children, Luisa made sure they knew both realities. They spent time at their paternal grandparents' mansion, but also at their maternal grandparents' simple house in Itaquera. They learned Russian from their mother, but they also learned that languages exist everywhere, in the streets, in the people, in the stories that everyone carries. And above all, they learned that a person's value must never ever be measured by where they were born, how much they have, or how they dress, but rather by how they treat others, especially those who cannot offer anything in return. Helena never became perfect. Gradually, however, she became better, and sometimes when she looked at Luisa playing with the grandchildren, she felt something she never imagined feeling: gratitude, because that girl she tried to push away from her son was, ironically, the one who taught her the most important lessons in life. That cruelty, even when refined, remains cruelty. That money doesn't buy dignity. That true greatness lies in recognizing when one is wrong and having the humility to change. And that sometimes the people we have the most to learn from are exactly those we initially judged as less. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Luisa and Gabriel has touched your heart. If you were moved by the journey of this strong woman who maintained her dignity in the face of humiliation, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what marked you the most. Have you ever been through a similar situation? Have you ever had to prove your value to people who judged you before they met you? Share your story in the comments. Every day we bring intense stories like this, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul, which show the strength that exists inside each of us when we decide not to bow before injustice.